They say horror movies just want to scare you, but what happens when a film scares the censors even more than the audience? In the 1960s, some horror movies weren't just pushing boundaries, they were smashing them with a sledgehammer. Why did governments around the world try to lock these films away from public eyes? Are these the twisted gems that still haunt pop culture decades later? Stick around, because these next 15 stories will prove horror can get you banned in any language. Psycho 1960. You think you've seen scary movies? Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho was so far ahead of its time that it made movie theaters put up warning signs and had censors running for the hills. It starts with the infamous Bates Motel, a shower scene that changed cinema forever, and a story that fooled everyone with its shocking twists. When Psycho hit theaters, no one was ready for its violence, its psychological mind games, or the way it tossed out every rule Hollywood had about who could die and when. Censors in the UK cut the shower sequence, thinking audiences couldn't handle the suspense and sudden terror. In some countries like South Africa and parts of Scandinavia, Psycho was banned completely, all because of its graphic content and the idea that horror could crawl right into your brain. The film's impact didn't stop at the box office. It changed the way people talked about movies, turning the phrase shower scene into pop culture shorthand for pure fear. Hitchcock himself had to fight to get his vision on the screen, even refusing to let latecomers into theaters because he wanted every scream to count. Decades later, Psycho is credited with inventing the slasher genre and proving that psychological terror could be just as powerful as monsters and blood. Its legacy is so deep that even people who've never seen the film know to be wary around motels and a certain kind of mother's boy. You could say Psycho was the movie that made horror dangerous, both in the eyes of the audience and the censors who tried to keep it under wraps. Peeping Tom 1960. If Psycho rattled nerves, Peeping Tom went for the throat and got banned for its trouble. Directed by Michael Powell, this British psychological horror didn't just flirt with controversy, it married it. The plot centers on Mark Lewis, a camera operator with a sinister obsession. He films the final moments of his victims. At a time when horror was still supposed to be about ghosts and shadows, Peeping Tom made the camera itself into a weapon and the audience an unwilling accomplice. When the film premiered, critics and audiences recoiled. The UK's censors banned it in several regions, calling it sick and evil. The harshest reviews all but ended Powell's career overnight. Even in the US, theaters wouldn't touch it, fearing public outcry. The core of the outrage was its willingness to expose the dark side of voyeurism, challenging viewers to look at themselves as part of the spectacle. It was less a horror film than a confession booth, with no forgiveness offered. But time has a way of turning scandal into legend. Peeping Tom is now considered a masterpiece of psychological horror, a film that dares you to question your own gaze. It's proof that the line between audience and accomplice is sometimes dangerously thin. Powell's vision was too much for the 60s, but modern audiences see it as a chilling warning. Sometimes the scariest thing is who's holding the camera. Blood Feast 1963. When Blood Feast hit the drive-in circuit, people weren't just shocked, they were grossed out in ways they'd never imagined. This wasn't Hollywood's polished fear. Director Herschel Gordon Lewis went for the jugular, creating a film so drenched in gore it basically invented a new genre, the splatter movie. Before this, horror was about chills and suspense. Blood Feast was about guts, lots and lots of guts. Authorities around the world didn't know what to do with it. The UK outright banned the film, refusing to let it play even in the grindhouse cinemas. In other countries, censors demanded entire scenes be cut or blurred, claiming it was too graphic for public viewing. The outcry only made the movie more notorious, as teens and horror fans lined up just to see what the fuss was about. The special effects look cheesy now, but back then, they were enough to turn stomachs and start urban legends. Critics called it vile, unwatchable, and the end of decency. But the box office told another story. Blood Feast became a drive-in legend and inspired countless copycats, making low-budget horror films a permanent fixture. Love it or hate it, The movie proved that sometimes the fastest way to fame is to be the most banned film on the block. Repulsion, 1965. If you thought British horror was all castles and fog, Repulsion will make you rethink everything. Roman Polanski's first English-language film plunges into the mind of Carol, a young woman whose lonely apartment becomes a nightmare landscape. The film is a slow-burn descent into paranoia and madness, blending hallucinations with reality until you're not sure what's real, and neither is Carol. When Repulsion was released, it was praised for its artistry but slapped with bans and heavy cuts in several countries. The UK censors hesitated over its disturbing images and the raw, unsettling portrayal of Carol's breakdown. In Ireland, it was banned outright, deemed corrupting. Even in the US, some theaters refused to show it uncut, worried it would warp delicate minds. The film doesn't rely on monsters or special effects. It's the horror of the human mind, claustrophobia, and the terror of being alone in your own head. Polanski's camera work and Catherine Deneuve's haunting performance turn every crack in the wall and every creaking door into a source of dread. It's a film that gets under your skin and stays there, long after the credits roll. Repulsion showed that sometimes the scariest place in the world is your own apartment, and that's a truth censors found far too close to home. The Sadist, 1963. Some horror movies want to unsettle you. The Sadist just wants to ruin your day, and for a lot of censors, that was reason enough to try and keep it out of theaters. Inspired by true crime headlines, this low-budget American shocker throws viewers into the sweltering California desert, where a pair of innocent teachers stumble onto a young man with a pistol and a serious grudge against the world. It's a tight, nerve-wracking game of cat and mouse, filmed with a raw edge that feels almost too real. When the film landed in the UK, the censors refused to give it a certificate at all. They called it excessively violent and depraved, fearing it would inspire real-life copycats. Even in the US, many theaters wouldn't touch it, while some states demanded key scenes be trimmed before showing it to the public. The tension is relentless, and the violence, while tame by today's standards, was a sucker punch to 1960s sensibilities. The Sadist became infamous as a grindhouse classic, proof that you didn't need a big budget to terrify audiences, just a villain with a cold stare and a loaded gun. Decades later, it's recognized as a blueprint for the slasher genre and a reminder that the most frightening stories aren't always make-believe. Sometimes, the real monsters are hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to stop the camera. Violent Midnight, 1963. If you thought small towns were safe, Violent Midnight will make you think twice. This American shocker dives headfirst into a sleepy New England village where a string of brutal murders turns everything upside down. What makes the film so notorious? It doesn't hold back at all. The violence is up close and personal, and the twisted family drama adds fuel to the fire. Censors in Ireland and Australia took one look and said, "Absolutely not." The film was branded too disturbing, with authorities claiming its mix of mayhem and mayhem-loving characters was a recipe for trouble. Even some American theaters wouldn't show it without edits, and the press called it exploitative and dangerous. But for horror fans, that was just an invitation. The movie became a cult hit, especially at drive-ins where the shock factor was half the fun. What's fascinating is how Violent Midnight influenced future slasher films. Its combination of small-town secrets, forbidden love, and unpredictable violence paved the way for classics like Halloween. Even if the film is less famous than others on this list, its shadow stretches long, reminding everyone that horror is just as effective when it's lurking behind a picket fence. The Flesh and the Fiends, 1960. Some stories just refuse to stay buried, and The Flesh and the Fiends proves it. Based on the real-life Burke and Hare murders in 19th-century Edinburgh, this British horror film digs deep into the world of grave robbing and medical experiments gone wrong. It's not just creepy, it's gruesome, with scenes that left censors squirming. Authorities in Australia and several other countries slammed the door shut, refusing to allow the film to be screened because of its gruesome detail. Even in Britain, some theaters demanded cuts, and critics warned that audiences might be too disturbed by the realism. The film's raw style made it feel almost like a true crime reenactment, which was just too much for some at the time. Yet, The Flesh and the Fiends was ahead of its time, mixing historical drama with horror in a way that made later filmmakers take notice. Its honest approach to fear and greed still hits hard. The real terror? Sometimes, it's not monsters that keep you up at night, but the things people will do for money and power. This one showed that the truth can be more horrifying than any ghost story. Paranoiac, 1963. Imagine being gaslit by your own family. Now make it a horror film. That's Paranoiac, a Hammer thriller that's as twisted as its title. Set in a decaying English mansion, the story follows Simon Ashby, whose grasp on reality crumbles as family secrets, murder plots, and ghostly apparitions close in. The film serves up a cocktail of madness, deception, and good old-fashioned terror. Censors in the UK and other countries were jittery about its themes of insanity and violence. Some demanded edits, while others slapped on strict age restrictions. Critics called it morbid and unfit for sensitive viewers. But that just made horror fans even more curious. Paranoiac didn't just scare audiences, it made them question what was real long after leaving the theater. Its psychological twists inspired later horror classics, showing that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't creatures, but people you thought you could trust. The lesson? Don't expect an easy ending when secrets are this deep, and never trust an old house with too many locked doors. The Haunted Palace, 1963. You want old-school Gothic terror? The Haunted Palace delivers in spades. Directed by Roger Corman and starring Vincent Price, this film is all cursed mansions, eerie fog, and villagers hiding terrible secrets. Loosely inspired by Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, it piles on the supernatural chills with ancient curses, possession, and the kind of atmosphere you can almost feel crawling up your spine. Some regions, especially in Europe and South America, banned or heavily censored the movie for its occult themes and unwholesome content. Even a few U.S. states considered it too intense for general audiences, leading to late-night-only showings. Critics argued that it blurred the line between horror and witchcraft, and censors worried it would corrupt impressionable minds. Despite the bans, The Haunted Palace helped cement Vincent Price as the king of American Gothic horror. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster in the shadows, but the curse you can't see and the secrets your neighbors are desperate to keep. Straitjacket, 1964. If you ever doubted that Joan Crawford could send chills down your spine, Straitjacket will erase all doubts fast. In this razor-sharp shocker, Crawford plays a woman just released from a mental institution after being accused of murder with an axe. The tension ramps up as the bodies start dropping again, and the question becomes, is she guilty, or is someone framing her? Censors in several countries weren't amused. Some called the film disturbing and too violent for audiences, especially with scenes showing axes and aftermaths Hollywood usually shied away from. The UK demanded heavy edits, and some American theaters pushed the film to late-night slots, hoping to keep it away from younger viewers. Critics scoffed at the over-the-top drama, but audiences flocked to see Joan Crawford unhinged and unfiltered. Despite all the controversy, or maybe because of it, Straitjacket became a cult classic. The film's blend of psychological suspense and shocking violence paved the way for a wave of psycho-bitty horror films in the decades that followed. Crawford proved she could outscare a new generation, showing that true horror can wear a motherly smile and wield an axe when pushed too far. Children of the Damned, 1964. If you thought creepy kids were a new horror trend, Children of the Damned will set you straight. This British shocker, a follow-up to Village of the Damned, dials up the dread with a story about a group of super-intelligent children born around the world. They don't speak, barely blink, and can bend adults to their will without lifting a finger. What starts as a scientific marvel quickly turns into a nightmare of control and fear. Censors didn't take kindly to its unsettling story. The film was banned in several countries, including Finland, and faced heavy cuts in places like Australia and Ireland, where authorities worried its bleak tone and scenes of child-driven violence would disturb audiences. Even in the UK, the film was slapped with restrictive ratings, and theaters were warned to keep children far away. Critics called it chilling and dangerous, nervous about its questions on authority, innocence, and human nature. Despite the bans, Children of the Damned became a cult classic. It stands out for its eerie atmosphere and moral ambiguity, making you question who the real villains are. The film's legacy endures, proving that sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't a monster under the bed. It's a silent child with the power to change the world, and not necessarily for the better. The Innocents, 1961. Every haunted house movie owes a debt to The Innocents. This British masterwork, adapted from Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, spins a ghost story that's all about suggestion and atmosphere. Deborah Kerr stars as a governess convinced that evil spirits are tormenting two children in a lonely country mansion. The film's eerie ambiguity and disturbing hints of trauma made censors nervous. In the US and UK, some theaters restricted showings to adults only, citing psychological intensity and themes considered too complex for general audiences. Other countries banned it entirely, worried that its implications and tense atmosphere crossed a line, even without on-screen violence. Despite all that, The Innocents is now hailed as one of the greatest horror films ever made. Its shadows and silences are more terrifying than any jump scare, and its ending leaves viewers debating what's real and what's imagined. For anyone who thinks horror is just about blood and monsters, this film proves that true terror can be as quiet as a whisper down a haunted hallway. Circus of Horrors, 1960. Roll up for the most twisted circus you'll ever see. Circus of Horrors follows a disfigured plastic surgeon who hides his crimes behind a traveling circus, turning performers into perfect beauties until things go horribly wrong. The film blends horror, melodrama, and crime, all under the big top. Censors in Europe and even parts of the UK were not entertained. The film's violence, dark themes, and moments of suggestiveness triggered bans and forced edits before it could play to audiences. Critics slammed it as morbidly sensational, and some countries refused to let it run at all, fearing it would corrupt viewers. Despite the pushback, the movie found an audience eager for something darker and stranger. Its lurid style and over-the-top plot became cult favorites, especially among fans who liked their horror a little theatrical. Circus of Horrors proved you don't need ghosts or monsters. Sometimes the scariest show on earth is all too human. Night of the Living Dead, 1968. If there's a Mount Rushmore for banned horror, Night of the Living Dead is front and center. George A. Romero's Game Changer launched the modern zombie movie, but it also shocked, horrified, and infuriated censors around the world. With its relentless violence, bleak tone, and scenes of the dead feasting on the living, it was too much for many countries. Bans rolled in from Germany, parts of Australia, and other regions. Critics declared it unsuitable for all ages. Even in the US, there was an outcry over how easily kids could walk into theaters and be traumatized by its raw imagery. Yet the controversy only fueled its legend, and audiences flocked to see the movie that everyone was talking about. Today, Night of the Living Dead is recognized as a cornerstone of horror, its influence echoing through every zombie film that followed. What started as a low-budget gamble became a cultural earthquake, proving that sometimes the scariest movies are the ones the world tries hardest to bury. So, what do you think? Were these films banned for being too terrifying, too bold, or just too real for their time? Either way, they didn't just shock audiences. They rewrote the rules for horror worldwide. Now it's your turn. Which of these banned classics would you dare to watch alone? Let us know in the comments. And if you love stories where movies break the rules, don't forget to subscribe, share, and join us for the next round of Cinematic Rebellion.